Commander Brightscale's secondary eyelids twitched as he monitored the array of holoscreens before him. His scaled fingers drummed against the control panel, creating a rhythmic tap-tap-tap-tap that echoed through the observation deck. Another cycle, another batch of fresh cadets about to fail his beloved simulation. He couldn't help but let a small smile creep across his reptilian features. Training Division, all systems operational, announced the AI's smooth voice. Simulation parameters unchanged since initial programming, 127 standard cycles ago. Acknowledged, Brightscale responded, his voice carrying the weight of tradition. The Galactic Military Academy didn't achieve its prestigious status by making things easy. Particularly not his department, the Advanced Strategic Operations Division, where he'd spent the last 30 cycles crushing the dreams of overconfident cadets. The academy itself was a marvel of engineering, a sprawling complex of crystalline spires and quantum-locked training grounds that orbited the neutral world of Centauri Prime. Its halls had produced the finest military minds in the known galaxy, and its graduates went on to command fleets that safeguarded civilization itself. But none of that mattered if you couldn't pass the simulations. Brightscale pulled up the historical data with a flick of his wrist. Computer, display failure rates for Siege Scenario 742B. The statistics materialized before him, a perfect record of failure. 127 cycles, 12,418 attempts, 0 successes. The closest anyone had come was a team of Arcturian strategic savants who'd lasted 6 hours before their defensive position was overrun. Most teams didn't make it past the first hour. Sir, his assistant, Lieutenant Pax, interrupted his musings. The new class has arrived at the briefing chamber. Brightscale's scales shifted from their normal blue to a slightly amused purple. Anything interesting in this batch? 3 humans, sir. The commander's color shifted to a concerned yellow before he could suppress it. Humans, Deathworlders. They'd only been part of the Galactic Alliance for 10 cycles, but they'd already developed quite the reputation for unorthodox problem-solving. Pull up their files, he ordered, trying to mask his unease with authority. The profiles appeared before him, 3 humans, all top of their respective military academies back on Earth. All with psychological profiles that would have gotten them rejected from any respectable galactic institution before first contact. But times were changing, and the Alliance had been forced to adapt. Sir Pax's antennae twitched nervously. Should we adjust the simulation parameters? Absolutely not. Brightscale's scales flushed crimson with indignation. This simulation has stood unchanged for over a century. It's a perfect test of military doctrine, strategic thinking, and respect for proper procedure. If these Deathworlders want to join our ranks, they'll face the same standards as everyone else. As he stared at the human cadets' files, however, a small voice in the back of his mind whispered that today might be different. He quickly silenced it. After all, how much trouble could 3 humans cause in an unwinnable scenario? He was about to find out. Commander Brightscale watched through the observation window as the new cadets filed into the briefing chamber. 20 of the finest young officers the galaxy had to offer, or so their records claimed. The Centaurian twins with their crystalline bodies took their seats first, followed by a cluster of Andromedans whose tentacles nervously twisted around their data pads. A lone Proximan war scholar, already taking notes with all 4 arms, settled near the back. Then came the humans. Jack Torres entered first, built like a cargo hauler with arms thick enough to wrestle a Jovian bear. His dark skin gleamed under the chamber's lights, and his grin seemed permanently etched on his face. The other cadets shifted uneasily in their seats. Brightscale had read his file. Former Earth Special Forces, specialized in creative demolitions, whatever that meant. Maya Chen walked in next, her movements precise and controlled. She was smaller than Torres, but something in her eyes made Brightscale's scales ripple. Her background was in corporate security penetration testing. The commander had looked up the term. Apparently, humans paid people to break into their own facilities. Madness. Last came Rex Davidson, lanky and relaxed, looking like he'd wandered into the wrong room. His file listed him as a freelance problem solver before joining the military. Brightscale had needed 3 different translators to understand some of his prior missions, and he still wasn't sure he believed them. A Deathworlder squeaked one of the Andromedan cadets, all 6 eyes wide. I thought they were taller. I heard they drink poison for fun, whispered another. They call it coffee. That's not even the worst part, the Proximan War scholar chimed in. They expose themselves to radiation. Voluntarily. They call it tanning. Brightscale suppressed a shudder. He'd been against admitting humans to the Academy, but the Alliance Council had been adamant. Humanity had proven themselves too valuable to ignore, especially after the Kraxan incursion. Who else would be crazy enough to ram an antimatter freighter into a hostile battlecruiser just to prove a point? The humans are displaying signs of amusement, Sir Lieutenant Pax reported, monitoring the emotional sensors. Their cortisol and adrenaline levels suggest they're excited. Of course they were excited. Deathworlders live for this sort of thing. Their homeworld, Earth, was a nightmare by galactic standards. Extreme temperature variations, high gravity, aggressive predators, and constant natural disasters. The fact that humans not only survived but thrived there had earned them their nickname. Remember the incident at the Naval Academy, Pax continued, when that human cadet treated a level 5 pressure breach as an opportunity to, quote, try something cool. Don't remind me, Brightscale grumbled. It took 3 weeks to rebuild that section. Though I must admit, using a plasma conduit as a makeshift surfboard was innovative. Down in the briefing chamber, the 3 humans had taken seats together, their body language relaxed but alert. The other cadets had left a conspicuous empty ring of seats around them all, except the Proximan War scholar, who seemed fascinated. Sir Pax's antennae twitched again. Perhaps we should warn them about. Absolutely not, Brightscale cut him off. The simulation begins in exactly 10 minutes. Let them face it cold, just like everyone else has for the past century. He straightened his uniform. Though perhaps we should activate the additional safety protocols. You know how humans get when they're problem-solving. As he headed down to deliver the briefing, Brightscale couldn't shake the feeling that his perfect record was about to face its greatest test. The humans were talking among themselves now, and they were smiling. In his experience, smiling humans were the most dangerous kind. Commander Brightscale strode into the briefing chamber, his scales now a confident shade of azure. The room fell silent, save for Jack Torres, who was still quietly chuckling at something. The commander shot him a stern look, which only seemed to amuse the human more. Welcome, cadets, to Siege Scenario 742B, Brightscale announced, activating the holographic display. A massive fortress materialized in the center of the room, rotating slowly. For the past century, this simulation has served as the ultimate test of military strategy and adherence to proper combat doctrine. Chen raised her hand. Question. Has anyone ever completed it? Brightscale's scales rippled with satisfaction. In 12,418 attempts? Not once. The closest was the legendary Arcturian team of 2,984, who survived 6 hours before their inevitable defeat. Rex Davidson stretched lazily in his chair. So what's the catch? The catch, Cadet Davidson, is that you must defend this fortress against an overwhelming force while following all standard military protocols. No shortcuts, no improvisations, pure, tested, proven strategy. The Centaurian twins nodded appreciatively. The Andromedan cluster swayed in nervous anticipation. The 3 humans exchanged glances that made Brightscale's scales itch. The simulation has remained unchanged since its creation, he continued, pride evident in his voice. It was designed by Grand Admiral Zox himself, incorporating every known tactical principle. The attacking force uses perfect textbook maneuvers. The defensive position is optimally designed according to all established military doctrine. Unchanged for 100 years, Torres asked, that insufferable grin still on his face. Not a single update. Not one, Brightscale confirmed. Perfection requires no modification. Chen was studying the hologram intently, her eyes narrowed. Rex Davidson had pulled out an ancient Earth device called a pocket calculator and was punching numbers, while Torres appeared to be counting on his fingers. You have 20 minutes to familiarize yourselves with the fortress layout, Brightscale concluded. Then, the simulation begins. I look forward to adding your names to our prestigious list of failures. As he turned to leave, he heard Davidson whisper to his fellow humans, Hey, you guys thinking what I'm thinking? Oh yeah, Chen replied. This is going to be fun, Torres added. Brightscale's scales flickered yellow again. He really should have activated those extra safety protocols. Commander Brightscale settled into his observation post, as the simulation crystallized around the cadets. The holographic fortress became solid, its walls gleaming with shield generators and automated defense systems. The attacking force materialized on the horizon, a perfectly structured assault team following century-old tactical protocols. Simulation start in 3, 2, 1. What happened next would be discussed in military academies for decades to come. Torres, you got the thing? Chen's voice crackled over the command channel. Got the thing, Jack Torres confirmed cheerfully. What are you doing? Screamed the Centaurian twins in unison as Torres began dismantling the main shield generator. Not deactivating it, physically taking it apart. Making improvements, Torres replied, his hands moving with practiced efficiency. Anyone got duct tape? Brightscale's scales shifted through 5 different colors of distress. They can't do that. That's not in any manual. Lieutenant Pax, cite the regulation they're violating. Checking, sir, but there's nothing specifically forbidding the dismantling of defensive equipment for alternative purposes. On the battlefield, Chen had somehow convinced the Proximan war scholar to help her rip up sections of the courtyard's decorative garden. The terrain's all wrong, she explained, hauling massive planters around. Who builds a kill zone with waist-high cover every 10 meters? It's like they want the enemy to advance. This is blasphemy. One of the Andromedan cadets waved their tentacles in protest. The fortress design was perfected by Grand Admiral Zox himself. Yeah, well, Zox never had to dodge actual bullets. Chen shot back, now building what appeared to be a crude ramp from the garden materials. Rex, how's the math coming? Rex Davidson sat cross-legged in the command center, surrounded by floating holographic displays showing weapon trajectories and power outputs. Almost got it. Hey, fun fact, did you know these shield generators are basically just big capacitors, and the fortress's power grid runs on the same frequency as the attacking force's shield systems? You cannot possibly be suggesting the Proximan war scholar's 4 arms all clutched their heads simultaneously. Resonance Cascade, Torres called out, now wearing parts of the dismantled shield generator like some sort of bizarre armor. That's my favorite kind of cascade. Brightscale slammed his fist on the emergency protocol button. This is not how military operations work. There are procedures. There are protocols. Sir Pax interrupted, antennae twitching violently. You need to see these readings. The humans have somehow reversed the polarity of the northern shield grid, and are they using the garden irrigation system as a conductor? Chen's voice came over the command channel again. Defensive positions, everyone. Rex, ready with the power spike. Jack, try not to die. And someone tell the Andromedans to stop crying. It's going to work. It cannot work, Brightscale roared. The attacking force uses perfect tactical formations. Their approach is flawless. Their strategies have been refined by a century of. That's the problem, Davidson announced triumphantly. They're too perfect. Perfect formations mean predictable formations. Hey, Commander, did you know that if you calculate the exact vectors of a textbook assault pattern, you can predict exactly where not to be? On the battlefield, chaos reigned. Chen had transformed the meticulously designed killing field into an obstacle course that looked like it had been designed by a mad architect with a grudge against the laws of physics. Torres was charging toward the enemy lines wearing jury-rigged shield generator components, bellowing what he claimed was an ancient Earth battle cry about lemons and combustion. The Centaurian twins had taken refuge behind an overturned statue of Grand Admiral Zox, their crystalline forms vibrating with anxiety. The Andromedan cluster had formed a defensive ball of tentacles and were refusing to emerge. Only the Proximan war scholar seemed to be adapting, frantically taking notes with all 4 arms while mumbling something about rewriting tactical doctrines. Sir Pax reported, his voice weak with disbelief, Cadet Davidson has finished his calculations. He's routing power from the dismantled shield generator through Cadet Chen's improvised conductor network, using the attacking force's own shield harmonics too. Don't say it, Brightscale pleaded. To create a feedback loop that will. Please don't say it. That will cause their own shields to. A blinding flash lit up the simulation. Where the perfect attacking force had been, there was now only confusion and chaos. Their shields had indeed cascaded, taking down their perfect formation along with most of their electronic systems. And through the chaos charged Torres, still wearing pieces of shield generator, still yelling about citrus fruits and science. The simulation was only 5 minutes old. They weren't even halfway through what Brightscale now realized was going to be the longest quarter hour of his career. Commander Brightscale watched in horror as Rex Davidson's fingers flew across the command center's controls. The human had somehow patched into every environmental system in the fortress, from waste management to temperature control. This wasn't warfare, this was madness. "Hey Maya, you know what happens when you flash freeze the coolant lines and then suddenly reverse the flow?" Davidson called out over the comm channel, grinning like a maniac. "Steam explosion," Chen responded, now using pieces of the decorative garden as mobile cover. "Correctamundo. Setting up the sequence now. Jack, how's our distraction coming along?" Torres's response came between what sounded suspiciously like gleeful whoops. "You know those standard-issue emergency flares we're supposed to use for signaling." "You didn't," Brightscale whispered. "Oh, he did," Pax confirmed, monitoring the feeds. "Cadet Torres has somehow converted 37 emergency flares into what he's calling a party package." The sky above the fortress erupted in a dazzling display of red emergency flares, deployed in a pattern that technically spelled out surrender now, if you were drunk and squinting. The attacking force's targeting systems, already compromised by the shield cascade, went into complete confusion. "That's not what those are for," the Centaurian twins wailed in unison. "Everything's a weapon if you're creative enough," Torres shouted back, now using his makeshift shield generator armor to deflect shots while running straight at the enemy lines. Rex hit it. Davidson triggered his coolant trap. Superheated steam erupted from maintenance ports that hadn't been opened in a century, creating a dense fog bank that played havoc with enemy sensors. Through this artificial cloud bank charged Torres, still somehow not dead, still somehow laughing. "The historical records indicate this fortress has never fallen," the Proximan war scholar announced, all four arms frantically taking notes. "But they never faced anyone who would use the waste recycling system as a weapon." Speaking of which, Chen's voice came through with far too much enthusiasm. "Rex, remember how I asked you to calculate the pressure in those recycling tanks?" "Maya, no," one of the Andromedan cadets pleaded. "Maya, yes," she replied. Commander Brightscale's scales had settled into a permanent shade of distressed gray. "They can't. They wouldn't. There are regulations about the proper use of waste management systems in combat scenarios." "Actually," Sir Pax interjected, "I've reviewed all protocols and there's technically nothing that says you can't use processed waste as a high-pressure projectile weapon. Because no one ever thought they'd need to write that rule." Davidson's voice carried the smile everyone could hear. "Firing solution calculated. Maya, the honor's yours." Chen had somehow rigged a manual override to the waste processing system. Combined with Davidson's pressure calculations and Torres's ongoing distraction, what happened next was both tactically brilliant and absolutely disgusting. "This is a violation of every sacred principle of military doctrine," Brightscale roared. "No, Sir," Pax corrected, still checking regulations. "It's actually a brilliant application of resource utilization and terrain modification. They're using every system exactly as designed, just not for its design purpose." The attacking force, already struggling with steam clouds and random flares, now found themselves dealing with high-pressure jets of recycled materials coating their sensors. Their perfect formations broke completely as soldiers scrambled to clear their visors. Through it all, Torres kept advancing, his jury-rigged shield armor holding somehow. The Proximan war scholar had abandoned their note-taking and was now actively helping Chen modify more fortress systems. Even the Centaurian twins had cautiously emerged, fascinated despite their horror. Commander Pax reported, "I'm detecting massive power fluctuations. Cadet Davidson appears to be routing energy from the fortress's backup generators into. Is that the cafeteria's heating system?" "Don't tell me. Please don't tell me." "He's created what he calls a microwave cannon, sir. The calculations are actually quite impressive." Brightscale slumped in his chair. 10 minutes into the simulation, and humanity had already reduced a century of refined military doctrine to improvised weapons and tactical chaos. The worst part? It was working. And they weren't done yet. Found it. Maya Chen's triumphant voice echoed through the command channel. "Whoever designed this place really loved their right angles. Hey Rex, remember that game with the falling blocks you showed me?" Tetris, Davidson replied, still orchestrating chaos from the command center. "Wait, you're not thinking. Structural integrity is just a fancy way of saying stuff that holds other stuff up, Chen announced, and I found the bottom block. Commander Brightscale's scales went pure white. Stop her. Someone quote Regulation 47B about maintaining fortress structural integrity. That only applies to friendly fortifications, Sir Pax pointed out helpfully. Technically, in this simulation, they're defending against their own fortress. Torres, still somehow advancing through the chaos of steam clouds and recycled waste, caught on quickly. Maya, you beautiful genius. Going to need a bigger boom, though. Way ahead of you, Davidson chimed in. Running numbers on a synchronized detonation. You know how the power core has those safety protocols that prevent overloading. Add those safety protocols, Chen corrected, already rewiring systems that should have been untouchable. Amazing how many backup systems you can bypass when you don't care about warranty coverage. The Proximan war scholar, who had fully embraced the chaos by now, was using all 4 arms to help Chen modify power conduits. This defies every principle of defensive fortification. It's brilliant. Sir Pax reported, his antennae now permanently twisted in knots. They're creating a cascading system failure that will. Commander, you should really look at these numbers. On the main display, red warning indicators bloomed like a garden of mechanical despair. Every system that had faithfully served the simulation for a century was being turned against itself. Davidson's power calculations, Chen's structural analysis, and Torres's improvised demolitions expertise combined into something that probably violated several laws of physics. 15 minutes into the simulation, Brightscale whispered. Only 15 minutes and they've turned my perfect fortress into. A really expensive domino set Torres supplied helpfully over the comm. 10 seconds to synchronized overload. Maya, clear the blast zone. Rex, hit the juice. The Centaurian twins, finally grasping the humans' insane plan, began crystalline screaming. The Andromedan cluster extended their tentacles in every direction, trying to brace for impact. The Proximan war scholar just kept taking notes, muttering something about revolutionizing demolition doctrine. 5 seconds, Davidson announced. Core containment failing exactly as planned. As planned, Brightscale sputtered. How can catastrophic system failure be planned? 4. Chen sprinted from her position, sliding behind a barricade that definitely wasn't going to survive what came next. 3. Torres locked his makeshift shield armor, bracing for impact. 2. The attacking force, finally realizing something was very wrong, began a textbook retreat maneuver. 1. Brace for awesome, Torres bellowed. The fortress died exactly as Chen had predicted, not with a whimper, but with a mathematically precise series of structural failures that Davidson's calculations had turned into an art form. The perfect right angles became perfect collapse points. The unbreakable defense systems broke exactly where they needed to. And in the end, as debris rained down and warning klaxons screamed, 3 humans stood in the wreckage of a century-old simulation, grinning like kids who'd just discovered sugar. Time check, Chen asked casually. 16 minutes. 12 seconds, Davidson replied. New record, Torres suggested. Only record, the Proximan war scholar corrected, still taking notes.